Mr. Speaker, there are, I believe, four main things which have contributed to Britain's decline in the last 5 years. First, far too little attention has been given to wealth creation and far too much to wealth distribution. So what has to be done? Top of the list must be a policy of incentive tax cuts. There's widespread agreement on this. There has been for years. The trouble is the government just doesn't do it. The Chancellor of the Exchequer has sympathy with the tax position of management, but sympathy is as far as it goes. The Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster, the government's resident example of congenial and civilised man, is much more expansive. In a television interview, he said, "The rate of tax on salaried talent is very high in this country. The putting of this right is a massive problem that will take a little time. I believe this to be a #1 priority in the Chancellor's mind for future action. That's my own view. It ought to be." But nothing was done. Even the Prime Minister tells his colleagues, if you talk to people in the factories and in the clubs, they all want to pay less tax. But pronouncement is not followed by policy. And lack of that policy leads to a hemorrhage of talent in management and a resentment amongst the skilled. The Jeremiahs sometimes say that the ordinary people of this country have lost the will to work. But let them work in other countries where they're no longer frustrated by British tax rates and they can outproduce and outsell our competitors. Vital as tax cuts are to restore management morale and that of the skilled worker, they're also needed to encourage the growth of small business. Because it's mainly from that sector that we shall get the new jobs, tomorrow's jobs, that we need for our young people. Now, no government can protect yesterday's jobs forever. It can postpone the day of reckoning, but it cannot escape it. It can ease the transition from one job to another. But this government tries to protect yesterday's jobs without facilitating the growth of new industries. That's a policy for penury and unemployment, in which the regions suffer most of all. For wealth creation, a different attitude to profits is also required. Profits are pitifully low, and as a result, several companies have announced cutbacks in investment plans, ICI and Hoover, for example. The alternative of borrowing to invest is precluded from many businesses by the continuing prohibitive interest rates, which are the consequences of this government's policies. All our hopes for better homes for families, for better schools for our children, for better pensions for retirement, for better health service, all of them depend for their fulfilment on our ability to create the wealth to pay for these things. Fail in that and we fail in all the other things. The government has failed and the social services of other nations have consequently overtaken ours. That, I believe, is the first reason for the decline. The second reason is that the government has concentrated far too much power in the hands of the centralised state and left too little with the individual citizen. Indeed, Mr. Speaker, if the government had assumed less power over communities and individuals, the remoter areas in the United Kingdom would have less reason to worry about the power coming from Westminster. Although socialism is about centralised planning and control, even some members of Her Majesty's government have from time to time begun to have doubts about the wisdom of the policy. A former distinguished member, the late Anthony Crossland, in a lecture in October 1975 said, "But we must take seriously the fears about the growth of state power, especially given the penchant of some socialists for the continual spawning of giant new institutions under centralised control. He continued, "We should not be in the business of creating giant leviathans manned by armies of bureaucrats." What a pity he and his colleagues did not take his advice. It was added to by the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster, who said in Birmingham this year, "We have to acknowledge that the decentralized private sector has outperformed the old-fashioned concepts of centralized planning." But of course, such wisdom marks him out as a man who the left must try to oust from his own constituency. But his views are ours, and we believe they're in tune with the nation, not, however, with the actions of this government. For centralization continues, and it even increases. For example, the Price Commission, with its investigatory powers, descends upon even the most successful companies to pronounce on their efficiency, having had no experience in that kind of business themselves. The Concordat demands more planning agreements between government and companies, yet another hindrance to the job of seeking new markets and producing the goods. In one industry alone, the chemical industry, plant worth millions of pounds would be lying idle today if companies had based their investment on totally unreal market projections put forward by the government and trade unions. The Concordat also foreshadowed the direction by government of savings in pension and insurance funds, away from the object of providing for pensioners and insurance holders to the objects of industrial strategy. But if the object of that strategy is to back success, the companies concerned will have no difficulty in getting finance. If it's to back losers, it would be better for pensioners if their money were not invested that way. But perhaps the most debilitating and damaging aspect of their policy of increasing state power is that supporters of the government positively believe in taking a higher proportion of the national income away from the taxpayer and letting the government decide on how it should be spent. In no way have they been reticent about it. What the policy boils down to is this: that the state should take more tax from the citizen and provide him with his basic standard of living according to what the government decides he needs. That would leave the citizen only less essential things to be found from the pay packet. A sort of pocket money society policy. And these things are put forward in the name of social responsibility, social morality, social progress, and so on. What they forget is that we shall never have social responsibility unless we first have responsible individuals. And how does responsibility grow if decisions on personal property and savings are constantly transferred to the state? We shall never have social morality without having individuals of moral worth, and that cannot be attained except by exercising choice and not taking it away. We shall never get social progress except through the efforts of individuals with a sense of purpose. Part of the reason for our decline is that Britain now shows every sign of a destruction of individual and productive energy which is wholly exceptional on any comparison with those European states most like ourselves. Those are the first two reasons: insufficient attention to the creation of wealth and too much concentration on increasing state control. I believe that the third reason for our problems is this: that the balance between power and responsibility in the trade union movement needs to be restored.